You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
Montana State University professor Dr. David Sands was no novice to the challenges of plant pathology, even before he began an education that would define him as a leader in the field. A silent generation farm kid, he spent his childhood rooted in the land. Now, in a roundabout manner, with detours through the arts, education, and conservation, Sands' daughter Claire has found herself equally entrenched in a green vision defined as much by growth and life as death. Their mutual enemy, an innocuous-looking little weed called Striga, which devastates crops and food security on 40 million farms throughout Africa. 6 years ago, Dave and Claire began the Toothpick Project, an intercultural and generational endeavor to fight fire with fire and help smallholder African farmers take their farms back from Striga's stranglehold with an equally innocuous-looking little fungus. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this podcast, Professor David Sands and his daughter Claire Sands Baker discuss plant pathology, the Toothpick Project, and a brave new world of agricultural biodiversity. So we've got Dave Sands and Claire Sands Baker in the house. What's your relationship to each other?
According to 23andMe, it's that I'm the father.
I'm his F1.
F1.
The F1 is the next generation after that moment of bliss.
That's too much.
I think I know what you mean. Who else is in your family?
I have a younger sister and a younger brother. And then they are married and they all have kids.
And how about you?
I'm number 3 of 4 boys.
What generation are you?
Before the boomers.
Okay, so the silent generation.
I'm remaining silent.
And what generation are you?
I don't know. Born in 1970. What is that?
So you're Gen X.
I'm Gen X.
We've got a debate later in the week called OK Boomer. And I've got someone from every generation who's coming to talk about why that stereotype is.
This whole thing is about how you talk to another generation.
Nice. That's awesome. So talking about difference in generations, what kind of toys did each of you have growing up?
Oh, man. We didn't have a TV because we lived out of city limits and there were 2 channels and my parents didn't want us to have a TV. So we just played in the dirt a lot. And we had, I wasn't big on dolls. We had some Lego toys, Lincoln Logs. We just kind of made up stuff. We played outside a lot. And we got a computer. He was an early adopter of computers. So we got a computer in maybe 79, Radio Shack TRS-80. And I was a total geek on it. And I would program.
Was that DOS?
Yeah, I think. I don't even remember. I'm so out of it now. Yeah, I would code. I would type in like 3,000 lines of code and then there would be an error and I'd have to figure out how, and just play Pong or something,
How about you, Dave? What kind of toys did you have?
I'm into Victory Gardens.
Victory Gardens.
World War II.
Okay, so you were still pretty young towards the end of the war, but your family were really into Victory Gardens.
And I grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
And I think that was pretty important in what I do now.
Did you do anything fun?
We would jump barbed wire fences on bareback horses.
Awesome.
We would take a horse to work. It's a big farm. And we learned about living and dying. And at the dinner table, we didn't talk about football or baseball. We talked about what to plant in the back 40, things like that.
Do you think that like Victory Gardens are emerging again?
Our project is to have them emerge throughout Africa.
No, I think in the U.S., I think around the world, they are. I think people had a panic, especially early in the pandemic, not having access to food. Also, people had more time on their hands and they were at their house. So they were kind of twiddling their thumbs and thought they'd take a stab at chives or something. I don't know.
Chives, yeah. How do I not get bored?
I think it's also part of the movement towards more organic, more careful what you eat, things like that.
Yeah, okay. Do you have any generational tension between you two?
I'm going to let him answer first. Yes.
I'm the silent generation. Remember that?
Yeah. So do you hold it back and not say anything until it's too late, and then it's just boiled over
Remember
the
that
top?
intelligence is maternally inherited, 60%. So I look to her when I want a good opinion.
Oh, okay. So you take her advice.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, any parent-child relationship's going to have a generational difference, and you have to kind of adapt to that. For us, it's a strong thing. I think that we balance each other pretty well.
I think we have the same vision. It's not generational. And the vision is we can make this world better if we really work at it.
Okay. Do you have any advice for each other?
My dad wrote a really great paper on teaching creativity, and I think that he should reread it because I think he could learn something from himself.
So he wrote a paper on creativity, and now that he's aged, he could re-examine it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely exemplifies it in his classroom and with his students. And I think now he's also working outside of the classroom. And so I think figuring out how to make that same message and lesson work in other parts of his life. Not necessarily on the tennis court or anything like that, but he's doing more outside the classroom, like more community.
I would take advice from you too.
I don't have any advice for you. This is for you two.
He's being really careful. He's not going to give me any advice.
I don't know what advice I would give you. What advice would you give Claire?
It's too late to give advice. She is cast on a pretty good trajectory, is the word you use. And she's going to have to figure things out for herself.
Thanks, Dad.
Really?
Yeah. Kicking you in the deep end.
I've learned all I can from you.
Tell me a little bit about each of your kind of growing up in education.
Oh, let's see. I grew up in Arizona after the war, and my father, who was a rancher and many other things, said all Sands boys should go to an Arizona university. And I said, fine. So I went to Arizona State. But after 2 years, I got a scholarship offer from Pomona College, which is a highly rated school. So I went there. And then I went to Berkeley for a doctorate, University of California,
Cool. Yeah.
Berkeley. That was easy compared to Pomona.
The Berkeley was easy compared to Pomona. What did you study in Pomona?
Microbiology, bacteriology, botany, and small classes. Basically, professor always demanded maximum performance from every student. He didn't compare students, or she didn't. It was always, let's see how far we can take this. Good school.
Yeah. So you're a plant nerd.
I'm a what?
A plant nerd. It's my highest compliment.
I figured this question was coming. I think that plant is one of the best artificial intelligence agents going.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's built in. It's been for 1 million years, had time to work out decisions. And we'd better learn from these decision makers.
Yeah.
They're really cool.
They're really good at collecting and storing the resources they need for long durations.
And what's funny is they'll throw away genes. They don't have a surplus of genes. So they'll throw away some moves they haven't made.
Okay.
And that is a big secret. And if you understand the biochemistry and the genetics of that, you can really help. And that's what our project did in Kenya.
Yeah. Okay. I want to know what you did in Berkeley and why did you switch to Berkeley?
I went to Berkeley because they really wanted me there. And they went out of their way to make sure I would go there. They gave me a full ride, and they were very bright people, and they expected me to really grow there. I think I heard one seminar a week, often by Nobel Prize winners. And seminars at Berkeley are never completed. They never get to show all the slides. People raise their hands. It's tough.
Oh, so during their lectures, they'll get interrupted by all these questions.
They get interrupted, as I will interrupt you and you me, and that's the way it goes.
All about it. And so you finished Berkeley, and did you go right into teaching, or did you have a career right after that?
There were 6 ads in the back of Science magazine. At that time, there was no money going anywhere. But I took an NSF postdoc in Australia, and there they had a bunch of weeds. And I found a bacterium and a fungus together could really knock down their worst introduced weed. And I got really interested in applications of all that basic stuff I learned at Berkeley. I mean, I was on computers and doing 200,000 tests on bacteria, biochemical tests, and putting it in the computer and doing it again. And then I finally found, yeah, but this can be applied. We can solve some problems. We can be a little bit more clever than just a computer geek. Okay.
That's great. Hey, Claire, when did you enter the picture in that story?
That postdoctorate that he did in Australia, I was conceived on the way home.
You're okay. So chapter 2, you were
Chapter
conceived
2.
on the way home from
Yeah,
Australia.
and he
like on the Mile High Club.
I think it was a ship, but I'm not sure. That's just what my mom has said. But I was born in Connecticut, and I moved here to Bozeman, Montana when I was 5. So I went to all of, kindergarten through senior year of high school. And then I ended up applying to colleges and ended up at Scripps College, which is across the sidewalk from Pomona College.
Are they rivals?
No, actually in sports, they're rivals. But my major was at Pomona. I majored in art history. And so it's a consortium of colleges, the Claremont colleges. And so you can take classes at any of them. It's a really cool program. Scripps is a women's college, really small. When I was there were only 600 women, really intimate education program. And my grandmother went there also. So there was sort of this family history of familiarity. My grandmother went there. My dad went to Pomona. So I ended up there. And then I moved home as soon as I graduated.
Moved home to here?
Here to Bozeman.
Cool. Well, how did you get into agriculture if you were an art major?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a weird path. I went into art after I graduated in art history, and I was in the arts in nonprofit management, galleries, and represented artists and symphony, art museums. And then I kind of transitioned into education. And then from there, I transitioned into also still in nonprofits, but in conservation and religion mixed together. So I had this.
Does that work?
Yeah, very much so.
I mean, I know the Bible teaches to be a good steward, but there's always this debate between dominion and being a good steward that contradicts itself.
Sure. It depends on how you're reading the Bible.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of passages in the Bible, and we didn't work just with Christianity. We worked also with Buddhism, and we had a pollinator project that worked with multidisciplinary or interfaith projects. So yeah, it definitely worked. It was actually a really interesting path, and it sort of opened my eyes to international work because we were working in Mongolia and Bhutan. And at that time, he got a Gates grant for the project that we'll talk about soon here. And that happened to overlap with my work because all of a sudden we were talking about working in a community, and that really fit with the work that I'd been doing for 25 years. So
the Gates grant came for the ag side, and then you brought on the logistics and I guess organizational side to turn it into something that could move forward as an organization. Yeah, and I didn't actually do that for the Gates grant. They set that up, but then once the Gates grant was wrapped up, it's like, okay, that was really successful. Now what are we going to do? And so just my skills seemed to marry well with his skills. And so we've been working together for 6 years on this now. And that is the Toothpick Project. That's the Toothpick Project. Tell me a little bit about it and kind of its origins. Well, Dad, why don't you talk about the work that you did pre-Toothpick Project?
I'm a plant pathologist. And as I told you, I'm interested in life, but also death and how things die. And it's all part of the same equation. And when I studied plant diseases, I always thought, and a lot of other people did, why don't we use diseases in a positive way? Why are we always fighting them? Why don't we find a way to kill plants or at least reduce their effect so that we can grow crops? But let's do it without chemicals. So if you apply plant pathology, you have all these fungi that kill a certain plant and only that plant. Why not use them? And the answer is they won't work. No good fungus is going to kill its only host. It's going to take 40%.
So it'll just weaken it.
It'll weaken it, but it wants it to survive, and it wants to survive for long periods. So 40% at best is all it does. So we found this out with government work, and then a guy walks into the lab. He says, "You know a lot about plant pathology and how to use diseases. Could you please kill the 3 major drug crops, which is cocaine, opium poppy, cannabis?" And they gave us a lot of money at MSU.
To develop a fungus that killed those 3?
A different fungus for each one. And we did. And these fungi, we quickly learned, are called foxy, Fusarium oxysporum. And they're very good at wilting down a plant. Then it got a little bit dangerous after about 10 years because we were getting pretty good at it.
So instead of using pesticides and spray on Roundup.
Spray on, kill everything.
Yeah,
why
kill
not
everything.
just kill the one you want?
Yeah, so kill the one you want by investing in this biology to kill it. And so when you got this funding to kill the drug crops after 8 years, it became too powerful.
It became dangerous.
It was more dangerous politically. He's working at a university where there are 15,000 students walking around, and all of a sudden eyes are on the university from bad guys around the world.
Oh, got it. 'Cause
Dangerous.
You're inhibiting on their cash flow because you're developing this product that will take out their
I think you
income.
surmised very carefully and very correctly that the university president said, "We better stop this. You better not do it. Move off campus, see ya, or stop doing it." So we switched over to Africa, where they have a terrible weed, and it inhibits them from growing their staple foods.
There was a pause in between the government project that he dropped, and then my uncle was head of surgery for the Navy, and he retired. And so he went over and volunteered at a hospital through his church in Maseno, Kenya. And he was a little bit of a controller. He liked to solve the problems and fix things. And he got really frustrated that he was just putting Band-Aids on people, not really solving malnutrition that he was seeing with the patients he was seeing in the hospital. And so he had also was working on a literacy project there with his friend Florence Oyosi. And so he said, "Florence, what's going on? Why is everybody hungry?" And she said, "Oh, John, come to the village, walk around. I'll show you this weed, Striga. It's strangling our crops. This is our number one problem." And so Uncle John walked around, was like, "Okay, I know the person that can solve this." And he called my dad over to Kenya. My dad went over, found wilted Striga plants, and was able to isolate foxy off of those plants, and then started working on the solution and teamed up right away with the Kenya Ag and Livestock Research Organization, which was called CARI at the time. Now it's CALRO. And teamed up with researchers there, teamed up with Florence's team. She's a farmer organizer. She has a program called the Liberty Initiators Network, which had 1,200 farmers. And so she worked with them. They all had Striga, and they developed this project, this program. The big challenge in a lot of work in developing countries is figuring out how to get something the last mile. So it's one thing to figure out in the lab, yes, we've taken this foxy strain, we've selected the spores that we want that emit really high levels, excrete really high levels of certain amino acids that are going to kill the Striga, but not the crop. This is how we take it from a 40% effective disease to a 90% effective disease by selecting for these amino acid excretion spores. So they figured that out in the lab, and then they had to figure out how do we get that to the farmer. And they worked with Florence, they worked with the Kenya Ag and Livestock Research Org, and figured out they can dry the fungus, grow it onto toothpicks, gets embedded in the wood, and then they can dry the toothpicks, seal them in a sterile drinking straw, and then deliver that to the village where the village can make an on-farm inoculum. using rice. So it's sort of, how do you get it from a lab all the way to the last mile down the road to a farmer, especially when you're dealing with a live inoculum. You're not dealing with like a can of Coke. You're dealing with something that needs to stay fresh. There needs to be sterile process involved. And they figured out a pretty good process. This is why it's called the Toothpick Project, because that original mechanism
they fit on the toothpicks.
was on the toothpick. Yeah.
It didn't cross your mind to just send them a big truck of Roundup?
Monsanto probably thought of that. But the farmers have about an acre of land, 1 to 2 acres. That isn't really the way a big chemical company wants to work.
They want to work on massive swaths of land.
Yeah, you go to Indiana and you can sell to one farmer treating 10,000 acres versus one farmer in rural Kenya that has 1 acre. I mean, it's just not efficient commercial viability. I mean, there are definitely some chemical products that are starting to make their way into developing countries in the agriculture systems, but the farmers don't necessarily have the resources to pay for them.
Mm-hmm. And it's not good for the environment.
Yeah, and the farmers that we've met, they're pretty wary of the chemicals. They're aware of the soil, they're aware of the water that they're using, where they're sourcing their water, what's flowing into their water.
Is the United States aware of that?
No, I don't think so.
A small percent of people have been buying organic food for a long time. Many ag scientists, in their inimitable way, say it'll never be more than 4%, but it is. It's going up. People are becoming aware. And then these chemical companies got in what Claire and I call a perfect storm. Could you explain that?
Yeah, he likes to call it the perfect storm. I think it's a pretty good description. Let's take glyphosate that was released as Roundup in, I think, around 1970, something like that. And when it was released, it killed everything it touched. It would just kill it. It was really useful in that way. Right now, there are over 24 weeds that are resistant to glyphosate. So this is actually a huge problem when you think of that product has not changed at all in almost 50 years. But the plants have changed. They're really smart. Like he was talking about, like these plants have their own computers built into them. They just move around things.
So over time, it started to be really effective. And then over the last few decades, they've outsmarted it.
Yeah, the plants have outsmarted the chemical, and the chemical never changed. So maybe the plants outsmarted the people that created the chemical. I don't know, we could look at it that way. So that's the first step of this perfect storm. There's a biological issue. And then you look at the consumer concerns. Like for myself, I try to buy organic potatoes because I know potatoes are heavily sprayed with chemicals and I don't want to ingest that. I also try to buy organic bananas because I've been to Costa Rica and Panama. And I know that those chemicals get sprayed and they go right into the water system. So I'm trying to do it for my sake, but also for the communities where the food's harvested from.
You're not supporting that industry or the local seller in those areas who are using chemicals?
When I buy banana here in the store, I'm not buying it from that local person. I'm buying it from Dole. And Dole is the one that's contracting with that farmer. So I support the farmers that are not contaminating themselves. Mm-hmm. But either way, I'm supporting a farmer because I'm still eating bananas. I think consumer concerns are pretty huge. And then you look at lawsuits. And this would be a third leg of this perfect storm. I think Roundup had 14,000 lawsuits against it in 2019. So the chemical companies, they just didn't shift fast enough. They didn't adopt new technologies, new innovations. And he presented at a biopesticide conference a few years ago, and all of the big chemical companies were there listening to new innovations. They're keeping their eye on it. In fact, one of our partners retired from Bayer Crop Sciences, Bayer. Yeah, they know about it. They just haven't, maybe these big ships haven't been able to turn fast enough.
So you say that this fungus, it doesn't want to kill the host because it would not have anything to live on. So does this fungus kill the Striga, or does it just weaken it so the crop can produce more?
Well, we had to figure out, could we make a fungus that could produce an amino acid right as it attacks the plant, not in St. Louis or Munich or somewhere, But could we have the factory right there? So the fungus identifies the plant, it starts attacking it, but it's careful not to really kill. But could we make it worse? Because the better you can make the fungus, the more adaptable it'll be to a toothpick, to a farm, to so on, the cheaper it'll be. And so we found out that plant cells are very much like computers. They make decisions. And if you understand what gene is missing in a plant, that means that lysine can really inhibit that plant, where normally, if it has all the genes, it couldn't. So we figured that out. We tested it. It seems to work. And it's a way to get the factory right in the plant, not polluting water and so on in Monsantoville or wherever, Bayerville or Syngentaville or whatever. It's an alternate way. You might call it a disruptive innovation. Also, these fungi, they still want to hang around. That's not a good business model for a person trying to sell an herbicide. Once they get in the soil, we have evidence they stay for some years. So once you get the product in the soil, it's going to hurt your business plan. You can't sell it every year. That's fine. It's a different business plan. I think people will find out how to do all this. And Striga, the weed in Africa, is only one of the 100 worst weeds in the world. There are plenty of them. And so we're trying to convince plant pathologists that instead of just always protecting plants, flip the field of plant pathology and create good, safe little factories right where you want them.
A little factory being
the fungus itself.
Yeah, okay. The factory is that the fungus builds and keeps.
The fungus creates the amino acids that kill the weed. So you could just put the amino acids directly on the weed and it would kill it. But it's expensive to do that. And you'd have to do it every year. The fungus lives in the soil. And every year it's going to create those amino acids. You know, we've shown persistence. We haven't done full trials on this yet, so it's anecdotal, but showed persistence in the soil after treating a plot for 5 years. 5 years since that last treatment, there's still no Striga growing there. It hasn't reemerged. Wow. So that's why he's talking about this kind of broken or twisted business model, because we could put ourselves out of business if we are really effective at getting this out to farmers.
But you're a nonprofit, right?
Yeah. Well, we're a social enterprise in Kenya.
Okay.
So we set up a social enterprise with the idea that we're not going to be fundraising so that we can give this product out to farmers. We want to be more sustainable than that. So it's a business, but all the money's getting poured back into it.
Cool. I was just going to say that nonprofits are built to put themselves out of business, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, hopefully, that'd be great if we could put ourselves out of business with this, but there are 40 million farms with Striga.
You got a lot of work ahead of you.
We have a lot of work ahead. To answer that question that you asked earlier about whether this kills the Striga, one of the amino acids that the fungus, one of the strains that we've selected for, is to excrete methionine. And that actually doesn't kill the Striga. It actually causes the Striga seeds to germinate. So this is sort of a twist in the innovation, in that we cause the Striga seeds to germinate in the soil, which makes them easier to penetrate and kill.
Because they start germinating and opening up,
yeah.
And then it kills them. And each year after a weed seeds, there become thousands of more seeds that go into the soil.
Not just thousands, like 500,000 seeds.
Yeah, wow.
And they can sit there dormant for 50 years.
So it will trick that compilation of seeds into opening up a little bit, and it will be more effective in killing them for the future.
So far, that's how it's worked, yeah.
We've talked about this perfect storm, and it's mainly on the weed and chemical side. What else makes agriculture fail?
I'm a scientist. I do experiments. I have an 86% failure rate. I am used to failure. I learned from the fails. And some scientists like to do little incremental experiments where they usually succeed. But if you're going to do a disruptive innovation, you're going to have quite a few failures at the start. And I look at agriculture as not really failing, but growing. It's learning how to do things first with chemicals, but that was the last century. We're starting to know so much about biology that we can actually find ways to make better plants that have double the nutrition, that have very good disease resistance, that can tolerate climate change and all that. So, okay, let us fail as we will as a scientist, but agriculture it's all about survival of humans. If we don't have food, we're in deep trouble. So I look at agriculture as being able to fight the perfect storm. We can get through these problems that we have created in the past. Just give us some smart people that are willing to try new outlier approaches, disruptive technologies, and watch us bloom. It's happening now. It's going to be very much better.
Okay, so we've grown accustomed to this old style of agriculture that has gotten into this path of maybe the wrong tracks and maybe setting us up to fail. You talk about failing 80 some percent of the time, and this is just one of our learning curves to make agriculture better. Is agriculture listening to the feedback?
That's a good question, because we have a guy who got a Nobel Prize in agriculture, Norman Borlaug, and he started the Green Revolution. And he basically got people to double the yield of the major staple crops.
This was 50 years ago.
Right after World War II, actually. And he basically said, look, all we've bought you is 20 years. You'd better get in the act of being more productive and looking at things differently.
When
and
was
nobody
this?
did.
This was the 50s, in the 50s.
So he rang the alarm in the 50s saying you've got this 20-year window of this
Yeah.
horribly irresponsible approach to agriculture. And
Yeah.
and we kept it the same since then.
Well, he was nice enough not to say horribly irresponsible, but it's becoming obvious that with soil pollution and depletion of nutrients and lack of really highly nutritious crops, some of our research has shown that the most nutritious crops are the most easily eaten by insects. So we have a lot to learn, and we better look at these plants very carefully and figure out natural ways to solve problems, not just straight chemical spray ways. Borlaug really understood that. Okay, but he at least got us going and doubled our yields. He didn't double our nutrition. If anything, we lost a little on nutrition.
I understand there was a big scare. There was a big population scare that they weren't going to have enough food to feed this larger population. Did that scare cause this shift in doubling the yield?
There's a good book by Charles Mann that's called The Wizard and the Prophet. And Norman Borlaug was a wizard, but the prophet was a guy saying, wait, if we produce more food, we'll have more people. We'll just make the situation worse. And so basically, Norman Borlaug understood that. He said, I'm just buying you 20 years. Nobody listened. And Jack Horner has already talked with you about population.
Yeah, he has.
Yes, I know.
If I remember correctly, he thought that the population would naturally take itself out.
It's a fatalist approach, isn't it?
I mean, do you disagree with that?
I think that our objective is that if we're going to have people, we want them to live with the utmost potential that they have. And we're a long way from that. And the Toothpick Project actually approaches that. It says we can empower women. They're the farmers in Africa, 85%. We can do better. And population problem can be solved by making people more capable of making decisions. If you don't get enough protein in your body in the first 1,000 days, you're doomed.
As a newborn?
As a newborn.
Take me through we've talked a little bit about this. How did we get here? I know the history of agriculture is a really long time, but through the 19th and 20th century, it really kind of escalated. It became mechanized. Tell me a little bit about that trajectory to here.
We had some major advances. People figured out that a hybrid plant has more yield than either parent, and that's the hybrid system. That was cool. We figured out how to make nitrogen fertilizer so cheap out of natural gas and things like that. That was a good step. We learned how to breed staple plants a la Norman Borlaug. We did that. I would say we need about 7 more inventions. We need some more things. And let's make agriculture so attractive and so victory gardenish that people start really learning that we want to food the world, not feed the world. There's a total difference. That we want people to be in their performance, in the high performance, not just feeding the world.
Will you take me through the differences of fooding the world and feeding the world?
I think I always have issue when he says this because he comes from a ranch and he thinks of feed as animal feed, like meal.
Okay, so just something to fill the belly and fatten them up.
Yeah. So in his head, when he's saying this, you have to interpret it as food as different than feed. Food as something that's nutritious, cultural, versus feed that is filling, that's calories.
Okay, so humans have gotten into this habit of feeding instead of fooding.
Well, Norman Borlaug did this. He was really after yield.
Got it.
And
okay,
the
so it
easiest
became
way to
a
have yield
yeah.
is to fill a plant with starch, not protein.
Got it.
And forget omega-3s and forget all the vitamins. Just make a lot of plants. We need some more inventors that come in and say, we can make more perfect foods. We might need CRISPR systems. We might need modern technology. We might need GMO. We might need all that. But the number one thing we should look at is making people more aware that they can perform better. That, to me, is pretty important.
So scaling it to smaller properties that are run by individual families, at least on some scale, to feed with nutritious food that are kind of victory garden-ish.
Even in the US, we're eating a lot of potatoes that are plumped up. We're eating a lot of corn in our diets. We're eating foods that aren't very nutritious. We're not loading up with vegetables for the most part. I think the US has a ton of obesity, ton of diabetes, ton of heart disease, all related to food. So I would say even on large scale farms, in fact, large scale farms are probably the fastest way to make change because there are only a handful of producers. But looking in Africa, if we can increase the yield of the staple crops, then the farmers can afford better seed that might be able to be more nutritious. They can diversify their farm, start growing crops that have more vitamins in them. So they have more on their, more diverse nutrition on their plate.
The last time I talked to you, you were having trouble bringing this idea to the US because the FDA didn't approve it. Is it like a loophole where where organic farmers can say that they want a biological organic approach to solving their weed problems?
We actually haven't run this through FDA stuff in the US. They're trying to just use single amino acids or cocktails of amino acids as a direct application. We've kind of had some stumbling blocks there, but we haven't tried bringing virulence-enhanced fungi to the US. But he did just get a USDA grant to continue some research that he's doing on Canada thistle and field bindweed. And this is in conjunction with the Montana Organic Growers Association. So
you should come over here after you get that product out.
The backyard there. Yeah.
All our new landscaping.
Everyone says that. Everyone
sure.
says that. No, I think, this is definitely something that'll eventually end up in the US. But if you're looking at the whole biocontrol industry, biocontrol means controlling any kind of pest, whether it's an insect or a fungus, because there are bad funguses that are attacking plants, or if it's a weed. You look at that whole industry, I think it's $34 billion a year in biocontrol products. 0% of that is bioherbicides, which means there's no bioherbicide, no market for killing weeds anywhere.
With biology?
With biology. It's just there's nothing commercialized. There are people that are trying to use insects to kill things like spotted knapweed, but you have to bring in so many insects. You have to do it every season. There are a lot of inefficiencies. And so there just hasn't been successful commercialization. it's good. People should keep trying these things, but it hasn't been extremely successful yet. So our approach using Foxy is one of the first to run through approvals for regulatory biocontrol agent anywhere in the world. By the time this podcast comes out, we should be approved in Kenya. It's been
Cool.
5 years of hurdles.
This will be a time capsule for
It'll
it.
be a little time capsule. We got a message a few days ago saying that it was approved. We just have to submit
Cool.
some more
Congratulations.
paperwork.
That's big news.
Yeah.
You brought up CRISPR a little bit ago. Should we control bacteria?
Well, I like yogurt. I like cheese. I don't necessarily like some of the diseases like the Black Plague. Should we control bacteria? Maybe we should understand how bacteria themselves fight against diseases. And CRISPR is one way that people found, and that's Nobel Prize winning now, how bacteria can prevent infection in themselves by viruses. So we have so much to learn. Let's give them a little slack and say, okay, they've made a few Nobel Prizes. Now, can we double the nutrition of the plant? And if we can do that, oh my gosh, that would be worth doing.
Would it be organic if you did that?
Right now, CRISPR is considered organic because it's the genes within the plant themselves. It's not bringing genes from outside. It's still a new technology and it could go amok, but we're on a tightrope in agriculture. We need to double the yield. We don't want to keep cutting down rainforests. We find that when we do, we run into some real problems. So if we could double the nutrition of plants, so instead of just getting staples like corn and rice and potatoes that have very low nutritional value, if we could put in a plant some much better proteins and protect that plant from insects, I said we need 7 more inventions. Let's go for it.
So this is one of them.
I think when he's talking about nutrition, you can talk about nutrition and you can talk about microbiome. And nutrition, we actually know quite a bit about. People have been studying it for a long time, but microbiome is in its infancy. And so, if you're talking about CRISPR, maybe I don't know where microbiome fits in there, but there's good bacteria and bad bacteria. And we have so much to learn in that and how it's related to nutrition.
So instead of controlling it, you're basically understanding what each bacteria does and you're enabling it to try it on different plants, and it has different outcomes depending on the bacteria that you're naturally using on it.
You're willing to come to my lab and work. These are the kinds of questions we have to do.
Yeah, okay.
We have to recruit the kind of minds that are not the physics and chemistry minds. They understand all the complexities going on between a fungus and a plant and a bacterium and the human microbiome. That's a different kind of person. Yes, you have to understand physics. Yes, you have to understand chemistry. And now we're asking for more. We want more.
Tell me, you brought up the Green Revolution. What is that? It started in the 50s?
Sure, it started
was announced
right
in the
after
50s.
World War II, really. 1945, when the war ended, there were 26 countries that were starving to death. And there was the old-time agriculture. And Norman Borlaug, somehow, by living in huts with dirt floors and so on and doing real breeding of plants, he figured out pretty quickly that plants weren't nearly as efficient as they could be, that they could be short wheats instead of tall wheats and put their energy into seed rather than into grass, things like that. And it took him 10 years and now have some very large centers all over the world doing the Borlaugian approach with potatoes and cassava and so on. That's the Green Revolution.
You're a professor at the university and you work with all sorts of students and their projects. Can you tell me a little bit about how you optimize that problem solving? It seems like you have a really great opportunity with students to get them to consider this a little bit more in such an ag heavy school that might be more traditional.
I'm considered an outlier. And people think that I am crazy, as a lot of people have thought the same about Borlaug and Louis Pasteur and so on. You have to be out there. And if you can create an environment in your lab where you're out there, students pick up on that. They say, if so, what then? These are hard questions in science. If what you say is so, what can we do with that? And do we just have to publish paper after paper and stay in core science? Or can we apply some of this stuff? I really like the question, if so, what then? That's where science really runs deep.
So when you have a student project, though, if they prove something, what then? And they create this great project and then they graduate, does their project just die? Is that frustrating? That would frustrate me to see all these great. I work with the university sometimes and I see all these amazing projects that just get shown off and then they're just like completely done.
I see a lot of death, but I think what he's cultivating is the mindset.
Okay.
More than the end product.
There's difference between my generation and the millennials and the X generation and so on. But what I see is that people don't necessarily want to just work with large companies and do what they tell them to do. There are a lot of young minds right now that would like to do startups by themselves. And I think biotech has so many avenues open for startups. I mean, we can do wonderful things in biocontrol. We can do wonderful things in material science. We can do wonderful things in all kinds of areas. So if we create a mindset that life is something more than just earning a living and making money and driving a Porsche car, it's really fun to see those kids in Africa and those lady farmers smiling when they see the yield differences. And they know that they can send their kids to school, especially their female kids. And that's a big empowerment. That's a big start. And once countries like Africa, once they get on this road of we can do it ourselves, we can do science. And our project is really starting in Africa, and it will go from there to the whole world. If we can get people in the right mindset, if so, what then?
Yeah. Is Africa taking you more seriously because they're more desperate for solutions? America just hasn't felt the gravity of the damage that they're doing with the pesticides.
Yeah, for sure. So Striga's on 40 million farms and it's causing $9 billion. This is an estimate, $9 to $13 billion worth of damage in crop loss every year. But that's off of individual farmers' tables.
That's not big farms. That's all individual yields
farms.
adding up.
The big farms have access to chemicals and they're spraying their fields. But this is the bulk of agriculture in Africa is smallholder farms. I think it's 85% of food production is from small farms. So yeah, the farmers are definitely taking us very seriously because they don't have any other solutions. There's nothing else for them to do besides weed. And the weed itself actually does the damage before it comes above the ground. It already attaches to the roots of the crop upon planting. So there's not a solution that's really viable. There also isn't the market competition. There's another product on the market, imazapyr-coated maize seeds that are resistant to the imazapyr chemical, and then they can coat the seeds in that, and then they can sell those to farmers. If that could get out to all the farmers, that would be maybe fine, help solve the food security issue. But their distribution isn't that wide either. I think only 3% in Western Kenya, 3% of the farmers have tried it, and it has a short shelf life. So it has its own issues also. The market is wide open and there aren't solutions.
Distribution's interesting. A friend was telling me that there could be enough food in Africa to feed everyone. It's just sitting on a dock and it can't be distributed.
That's part of it. I think that Africa has huge potential. We just attended it actually stemmed out of the Alliance of Green Revolution. It's the AGRF conference, Alliance for Green Revolution Forum or something like that. And there were 7,000 people attending. And time after time, the presenters were talking about, we have enough land, we have enough farmers, we have the innovation to feed the continent and sell off the continent to become a food provider for the rest of the world. But the pieces haven't come together yet. It's tricky because Africa is 54 countries and they're all operating independently. Whereas you look at the EU and it's all the countries operating pretty much as one. So for example, for us in Africa, we'll be registered in Kenya. And then we have all the other countries to go through these hurdles together.
Jeez, yeah, wow.
And there'll be some things that'll be shared, like the toxicology tests. Those will translate from Kenya to Ethiopia or Zimbabwe or whatever. But it's a complicated country. And so there's a lot of talk right now about One Africa, about trade zones and harmonization of regulatory procedures within those trade zones so that it'll make things faster, more efficient.
Dave, I want to go back to your students and not being able to fulfill projects, but your goal of shaking them up and making them feel this different way to think about agriculture. We talked a little bit about it being a human-centered design, not going for the Porsche and the fancy stuff, but what do you mean by human-centered design?
Well, the Toothpick Project, I think if you look at that toothpick itself, the actual delivery mechanism, and some of this is looking at it in hindsight and thinking, oh yeah, that really was a human-centered design process. But working with a farmer, a woman farmer, on how to get it out to her farmer friends. What skills do they have? What are their interests? What does their day look like? What do they have access to? And so how can you figure out the solution that works around all of those things? And so for us, we can get the toothpick from the lab to the village, and then the farmer can cook a pot of rice. She knows how to do that. She can access rice. She can access water. She can boil it in the pot on her stove with her wood-fired stove or her pellet stove or whatever she happens to be using. And then she can put the toothpicks in the rice in a sterilized Tupperware container, Rubbermaid kind of box, and shake it twice a day for 3 days and grow her own on-farm inoculum. So this is human-centered design. It has all the tools that she needs are accessible to her. It's really high-tech innovation, the way the spores were selected, but it's a really accessible delivery mechanism. In that regard, it is human-centered design. It's capitalizing on skills that women have over men, and women are the farmers, but women don't have control over the land. They don't necessarily have control over the finances and the inputs that are going to go into the farming. They don't have control over the supply chain. This is a generalization, but this is, for the most part, across Africa, 85%, or at least in Kenya, 85% of the maize farmers are women, but they don't have the whole supply chain covered. Men are reaping the benefits out of that. So this actually puts so much more control in the farmer's hands because she's able to do this herself. It's a pretty cool system. So I think in that regard, it's human-centered design.
So human-centered design, meaning that you've considered all of the local challenges that farmer will face and the capacity they'll have to produce this by considering their stove, their rice, their water.
And I want to clarify that we didn't come up with this. Montanans didn't come up with this plan. This was designed by Kenyan women farmers. There's something that we have to be aware of that. And when you were asking about what's changed in agriculture, one thing that's changed is that I was able to text my colleague in the field in Vihiga County, Kenya, this morning on my phone. That's pretty amazing that I can do that. I got emails messages in WhatsApp chat groups in Uganda all day today. And that's changed just within 5 years.
You're saying the communication has gotten so much easier to connect with scientists and farmers in Africa. But there's also, is there a colonial side when you're giving advice from America is that like an armchair scientist?
I think that you have to wrap yourself with awareness of how everything's positioned. And so we try to be really aware of not being colonialist in this, or let me reap the benefits of you using this product. We're not trying to reap the benefits of them using the product. We're trying to pass the product to them to help
These
develop
fungi
it.
come from the local countries. These countries have plenty of good scientists, plant pathologists. All we do is give them a little bit of a technological boost and say, now you have to mind this yourself.
What's holding you back?
Well, I touched on regulation. That is slow because we're kind of chopping our way through it before other people are. But there are a lot of people alongside us that are excited about us making progress forward. So I think that the regulatory hurdles will speed up in a matter of the next decade. I think that communication internationally it's only going to get better. It's pretty exciting. I think that the pandemic has remarkably lended itself to this kind of development. We've been able to attend 3 international science meetings, events that we wouldn't be able to have attended previously because it's all gone online.
Yeah, so that opportunity of being there and featured on maybe a larger scale because the access of people from all over the world came together easier on Zoom.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We are working at the front line of climate change. Striga, the weed, our leading weed right now, is really, it loves climate change. It loves deficient soils. It loves floods. It loves droughts. It's way more immune to all of these challenges than the crops are. So our farmers are feeling it. They're right on the front line of climate change. Equatorial, we're dealing with locusts. We're dealing with all these kind of plaguey things in addition to the pandemic. So I think that is, it's not necessarily holding us back. It reinforces why we should be using biology to fight biology because both ends can flex. Whereas if we were using a chemical to fight biology, we're working with something that's static, fighting with something that's shifting all over the place.
It doesn't seem like there are a lot of people doing this type of work, but it sounds like people are getting inspired. You said a minute ago, because of the pandemic, it's kind of elevated the
Well, Claire,
the
how many
momentum.
people have we recently trained or started training in other countries besides Kenya? I mean, this is getting going now.
Yeah, I'll say that my dad's an old guy. You know, he's born in 1941. So, and he created this innovation. And it took time for this perfect storm to happen, for this to gain some speed and some leverage. And in 2018, we really need to start expanding this faster than what we're seeing happening in Kenya. And so despite business advisors saying, no, you need to focus on Kenya, we turned the other way and said, we are going to start training scientists in other countries. And we got a great grant to help launch this. And we trained scientists from 11 other countries. We picked mid-career and early career researchers. They all work for research organizations, either their country research organizations or some universities. And we did a training here at Montana State University with them. And then we were supposed to have a second training with them in France at the USDA Biocontrol Lab in Europe. And that got delayed in April because of COVID. But it's a really fabulous group we have 14 scientists. We actually were selected by UNDP Cultivate program to also add Ethiopia to our mix. Hadn't selected them previously. So that'll be our 13th country. That's sort of the first step we need to do is broaden the research. You know, we've done one approach so far, but these scientists are going to be able to also help us look at not only Striga, but other weeds. We've only looked at Striga and how it attacks maize, but it also attacks sorghum, millet, dryland rice, cowpea, sugarcane. Sudan's reporting that it's attacking wheat. So these scientists are also bringing with them a huge wealth of information on those different crops. And then there are different delivery mechanisms. So we might not always be using the toothpick method. Our researcher in Kenya recently received a Climate Smart grant for seed coating, where we can take our fungal strains and coat them on maize seeds or sorghum seeds and use that as a direct delivery mechanism. And it's looking actually pretty promising right now. So that's really good too. We're also in our infancy and we have so much more depth that we need to investigate. So broadening the scientists is really important.
Okay. All of these are kind of your succession, branching out and teaching it is how you're planning to bring your succession plan to life. When we talked earlier, you made it seem like there are like 3 people in the world working on it.
It's true.
And it might have been like that before this momentum you got, right?
Yeah. I mean, my dad was working on it. A guy named Johnny Gressel at the Weizmann Institute in Israel was working on it. He's older than my dad. And Sila Nzoki is our researcher in Kenya. and he's been working on this for over 10 years. So those were our 3 essential points, but we've broadened it now with these other researchers.
I mean, how radical should we be operating right now?
That word radical is interesting because when a seed germinates, the first thing it does is throw off a radical.
I meant the pun.
And it's the same sort of thing. We have a radical idea. It's a new innovation. It's a new way to look at nature and to live with it. That's radical. But I think it's going to develop. I think it has strong points. It's not the same business model. It's not the same ecological model as using chemicals at all. It does require that people understand, wait, that is a particular weed and that over there is another weed. So there have to be some kind of training, but at least it can be homegrown. It can be done locally. And that's why our organic growers here really want it. And they don't consider it radical, but they're some of the most innovative people I've ever met. They have to solve problems in new ways. Organic agriculture is very young and very old. We let chemical industry get ahead of us by 30 years, and now we have a lot of catch up to do.
Speaking of radical, so we were asked to join the Future of Food roadmap team for X Prize. They wanted to look at the future of food and figure out what challenges they could create for X Prize in the future. It was great. It was really fun. It was like 3 or 4 days of in a room with a bunch of people from around the world talking about agriculture, about food, nutrition, environment, culture. And our idea didn't actually really make the cut because it was too radical. It was too early. They've put a lot of emphasis into artificial meat, which is also cool. Great room for that.
It's kind of radical.
It's rad. Packaging, they're looking at that. But our idea was a little bit too early to grab that attention. And so I think that we have to be really accessible. And I think that's why, we have a great relationship with the Organic Farmers Association in Montana. We're trying things in their fields. They're coming to the lab. It's a really personal, intimate relationship with them. We've written grants together with them to advance this. So, I think being really radical is great, but you also have to be really personable and make it really accessible. And so that's what we're able to do with the organic group. Whereas if you start tackling the whole world, it's too big.
So yeah, I guess radical, we brought it to kind of a radical idea that's kind of out there, kind of an outlier. What I meant by it was how urgent should we be operating right now?
Yeah, I think we should be operating with urgency, but we also can't be too scary.
You sense the urgency because we're way past this 20-year timeline that we were given on this trajectory. So we need to be urgent, but if we take it too radically, then people won't follow.
Yeah.
I think I'm a lab scientist and I'm very radical. Claire understands much more about what it takes to get something the last mile. And together we work very well on that. So we have a radical idea. We don't need very many people to understand it. We train a few. They modify it and make it better. It's a beautiful thing. So, okay, I'm radical. I have a lot more ideas I could do, 3D printing of seed and all kinds of things. But we're stuck on this one project in this interview. And the idea is you take a scientist, you pull the best out of him or her, and then you try to get it to the last mile. And that's a hard work.
The organizational work to get it approved and into the hands of whoever's using it.
Yeah. We applied for a MacArthur Foundation 100 and change grant, which is they're giving out $100 million to one organization in the world. And this is the second time that they've presented this request for proposals. And the first one went to Sesame Street for refugees, Syrian refugees, which is a pretty cool project.
$100 million?
$100 million.
Wow.
So we applied for it, and we made it through 4 hoops, 4 levels of evaluation and of experts looking at our work. That would have been a total pie in the sky kind of grant. We went into it knowing we weren't going to get it because we weren't advanced enough to get it, but we were trying to take kind of a radical stab at it, going big for a huge injection of funding. And really when it comes down to it is the science has been developed. The innovation is there. This is like if you're looking at immunotherapy or you're looking at CRISPR or something, you get to a point where it's like, okay, immunotherapy is, we now know how it works. And now then there's this huge thing of all of the medical approvals and FDA trials and all of that. Or if you're looking at CRISPR, same kind of thing. It takes a really long time for it to get off the bench. Our $100 million proposal really was mostly a lot of it was field work. The actual investment in the scientists was, I think, 20% of that. But it's not that much you're thinking we're talking
in the worldview.
In the worldview, off the plates of smallholder farmers, $9 billion gone every year. It's not that much. So I don't know. I mean, how do we look at it radically? I think that because it's new, it's scary, and there's not a way to measure it.
So you made
against other things.
But you made it to the top 100 list of this grant.
Yeah.
So they liked a lot of the projects, including yours, and picked the top 100 ag projects in the world.
They weren't all ag. They were
Okay.
all over the place.
Yeah.
And we made it to the top 100 of all these projects.
And so there's this big list of where people can go to see who they should be supporting if they're looking to spend money.
Yeah, MacArthur actually created a new platform called Bold Solutions Network. And so they are now promoting these top 100 ideas through this network.
How can people support your project?
You can find out all about it at www.toothpickproject.org. And we have sort of some social media. It's not like top of our priority, but we, try to keep people updated on field trials and research projects we have going on. We do still have research going out of Montana State University. So that's an avenue for people to support biocontrol even more broadly than just the Toothpick Project. And then people can donate to the Toothpick Project. We have a couple different charitable aspects there.
My daughter's very good at this. I dream up how computers and plants process the information on the outside. Claire figures out how whole civilizations and governmental systems process information. And together, I think we're a good team.
The future of agriculture is arguably intertwined with food security, nutrition, chronic disease, and a host of other worldwide concerns, drawing both political and regulatory action. Pesticidal fallout is now at the epicenter of the contentious climate, environment, and public health debate. No one wants glyphosate in their morning cereal. As Professor Sands argues, we've outgrown Norman Borlaug's Green Revolution solution of the 1950s. Quality is now of equal concern as quantity, and the provision of diverse nutrition, food versus feed, is the new radical revolution. With 250 students currently enrolled in Sands' Intro to Biotechnology course at MSU, the youth, it seems, would agree. Life is more than making money, acquiring, and consuming. Whether via concerted efforts like the Toothpick Project or a growing host of other proposed startups, the time is upon us for human-centered applied science, for the cultivation of Sands. If so, what then? Mentality. Well, as Claire simply answers, if we all really work at it, then we make the world a better place. For more information about the Toothpick Project, including updates on field trials and research, visit toothpickproject.org. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tay Chamberlain here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.